Dr. Phil dropped the microphone. The studio froze. Because the woman who just walked through that door was someone he had never forgotten. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The taping was routine, another episode, another guest, another story. But then the producer's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Phil, we have a situation." He turned toward the entrance, and that's when he saw her. Standing in the doorway, trembling, tears already streaming down her face. And in that instant, 25 years collapsed into a single, impossible moment. The audience didn't understand yet. The cameras were still rolling. But Dr. Phil knew. He knew exactly who she was. And he knew why she had come back. If you want to see what happens when a life comes full circle in the most unexpected way, subscribe now, because what's about to unfold will stay with you long after this video ends. 25 years earlier, the Dr. Phil show was just beginning to find its voice. It wasn't the cultural phenomenon it would become. It was raw, urgent, still learning how to balance entertainment with intervention. And on one particular morning in 1999, a young woman named Sarah walked onto that stage. She was 19 years old. Thin to the point of frailty. Her eyes were hollow, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every step required calculation. She wore an oversized sweater that hung off her frame like a curtain. Her mother sat beside her, gripping a tissue so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The topic was eating disorders. Sarah had been struggling with anorexia for 3 years. She had been hospitalized twice. Her weight had dropped to a dangerous level. Her family was terrified. And she had agreed to come on the show as a last resort, a desperate plea for help that she wasn't even sure she wanted. Dr. Phil didn't waste time with pleasantries. He leaned forward in his chair, looked directly at her, and said, "Sarah, I need you to tell me the truth. Do you want to live?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Sarah stared at him, her lips parted but no words coming out. Her mother sobbed quietly beside her. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was the kind of moment that could go either way, toward breakthrough or collapse. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I don't know." Dr. Phil nodded slowly. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look disappointed. He just looked at her like he could see everything she was hiding. "Okay," he said. "Then we're going to figure that out. Right now. Today. Because if you walk out of here without an answer to that question, you might not get another chance." What happened in the next 60 minutes would change Sarah's life forever. But no one, not even Dr. Phil, knew that the impact would reach across decades. The segment was supposed to last 15 minutes. It went on for nearly an hour. Dr. Phil brought in a nutritionist, a therapist, and a former patient who had recovered from anorexia. He walked Sarah through the medical realities of what was happening to her body. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to motivate her with platitudes. He simply laid out the facts. Her heart was weakening, her organs were shutting down, and if she didn't make a decision soon, the decision would be made for her. But then he did something unexpected. He stopped the cameras. "Cut," he said, waving his hand toward the control booth. "Stop the tape." The studio went silent. Producers exchanged confused glances. The audience murmured. Sarah looked up, startled. Dr. Phil stood, walked over to her, and knelt down beside her chair so they were at eye level. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for her and her mother to hear. "I'm not doing this for the cameras, Sarah. I'm doing this because I've seen too many kids like you end up in a place they can't come back from. And I don't want that to be you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. It had the name and number of a treatment facility in Arizona. "This place saved my nephew's life," he said. "I'm going to call them right now, and I'm going to get you in there today. But you have to say yes. You have to want this." Sarah stared at the card. Her hands were shaking. Her mother was crying openly now. And then, barely audible, Sarah said, "Okay." Dr. Phil nodded. He stood up, turned to the producer and said, "Get her checked in. I don't care what it takes. Make it happen." The cameras never captured that moment. It wasn't part of the episode. But it was the moment that mattered most. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah spent 6 months in that facility. It wasn't easy. There were days she wanted to leave. Days she screamed at the therapists, refused to eat, called her mother begging to come home. But slowly, painfully, something shifted. She started to see food not as an enemy but as fuel. She started to see her body not as a betrayal but as something worth protecting. And she started to believe, for the first time in years, that she deserved to live. When she was discharged, she wrote Dr. Phil a letter. She thanked him for the intervention. She told him she was going back to school. She promised she would keep fighting. She didn't expect a response. She figured he received hundreds of letters like hers. But 2 weeks later, a handwritten note arrived in the mail. "Sarah, I'm proud of you. Keep going. You're stronger than you think. Phil." She kept that note in a small wooden box beside her bed. And every time she doubted herself, every time the old voices crept back in, she would take it out and read it again. Years passed. Sarah finished college. She became a social worker. She got married. She had 2 children. She built a life she never thought she would have. And through it all, she carried that note with her, a quiet reminder of the man who had refused to let her disappear. But Dr. Phil had no idea. He had moved on to thousands of other guests, other crises, other lives. Until today. The current taping had been proceeding normally. The guest was a young man struggling with addiction. Dr. Phil was mid-sentence, making a point about accountability, when the producer's voice came through his earpiece again. "Phil, we need to pause. There's someone here who says she knows you. She's asking to come on stage." Dr. Phil frowned. Unscheduled interruptions were rare. He glanced toward the wings, and that's when he saw her. A woman in her mid-40s, standing just off stage, clutching a small wooden box. Her face was familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Not yet. Hold on," he said to the guest, then turned toward the entrance. "Ma'am, can I help you?" She stepped forward, and the studio lights hit her face. That's when it clicked. The eyes. The shape of her smile. The way she held herself, no longer frail but strong, grounded. "Sarah?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Hi, Dr. Phil." The audience gasped. The guest in the hot seat looked confused. The cameras kept rolling, but no one was paying attention to the script anymore. Dr. Phil stood slowly, still holding the microphone. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her, as if trying to make sure she was real. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked, his voice thick. "I came to say thank you," she said. 25 years ago, you saved my life. And I wanted you to know what happened after." The studio went completely silent. Even the crew stopped moving. Dr. Phil set the microphone down on his chair and walked toward her. Sarah opened the wooden box and pulled out the handwritten note he had sent her all those years ago. It was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but still intact. "I kept this," she said, holding it out to him. "I've read it 1,000 times. And every time I did, I remembered that someone believed I was worth saving." Dr. Phil took the note, staring at it like he was seeing a ghost. "I remember you," he said quietly. "I remember that day. I remember thinking, I didn't know if you'd make it." "I did," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I made it because of you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed her with her husband and 2 young children, all of them smiling on a beach somewhere. "This is my family," she said. "My kids are 7 and 9. They wouldn't exist if you hadn't stopped that taping. If you hadn't made that call." Dr. Phil's eyes glistened. He looked at the photo, then back at her, then out at the audience. "You did the work, Sarah. I just made a phone call." "No," she said firmly. "You saw me. When everyone else saw a lost cause, you saw someone worth fighting for. And that made all the difference." The audience erupted into applause. People were standing, wiping their eyes, some openly weeping. The guest who had been in the hot seat was clapping too, visibly moved. Dr. Phil pulled Sarah into a hug. It wasn't performative. It wasn't for the cameras. It was just two people who had been connected by a single, life-altering moment, finally closing the circle. When they pulled apart, Dr. Phil turned to the camera. His voice was steady, but his emotions were clear. "This," he said, "is why we do this show. Not for ratings. Not for drama. For this. For the chance that maybe, just maybe, we can make a difference in someone's life." He looked back at Sarah. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for letting me see what happened. This is everything." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." After the taping ended, Dr. Phil took Sarah backstage. They sat in his dressing room for over an hour, just talking. She told him about her work as a social worker, how she now helped young people struggling with the same demons she had faced. She told him about her kids, about the life she had built, about the moments when she still had to fight the old voices but now had the tools to win. Dr. Phil listened, asking questions, laughing at her stories, marveling at how far she had come. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed her pictures of his own grandchildren. "Life's funny," he said. "You think you're just doing your job, and then something like this happens, and you realize maybe it mattered more than you thought." Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small journal. "I kept this during treatment," she said, opening to a page marked with a ribbon. "I wrote something the day after you sent me that note. I want you to hear it." She read aloud. "Today I got a letter from Dr. Phil. He said he's proud of me. Nobody has ever said that to me before. I don't know if I believe it yet. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try because someone I don't even know took the time to tell me I matter. And if I matter to him, maybe I matter to me too." Dr. Phil's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, composing himself. "You kept that all these years?" "Every word," she said. "It became my anchor. When I didn't think I could make it through another day, I'd read that entry. And then I'd read your note. And then I'd take one more step forward." He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "You know what the hardest part of this job is? You never know. You meet someone, you do your best, and then they walk out that door and you just hope. You hope it was enough. You hope they made it. But you rarely find out. Now you know," Sarah said softly. Before she left, he gave her his personal contact information. "If you ever need anything," he said, "you call me. Not the show. Me." She nodded, clutching the card like it was made of gold. As she walked out of the studio, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete peace. She had come full circle. The girl who once didn't know if she wanted to live had become a woman who was deeply, joyfully alive. And the man who had helped her find that path now knew that his work had mattered in ways he could never have imagined. Dr. Phil stood in the hallway long after she left, holding the worn note she had returned to him. He slipped it into his pocket, a reminder that sometimes, the most important moments happen when the cameras stop rolling. That sometimes, saving a life isn't about the grand gestures. It's about showing up, asking the hard questions, and refusing to let someone vanish into the darkness. And 25 years later, that choice had come back to him, not as a burden, but as a gift. The episode aired 3 weeks later. It became one of the most watched segments in the show's history. Thousands of people wrote in, sharing their own stories of recovery, of second chances, of the moment someone refused to give up on them. Treatment centers reported a surge in calls. Families reached out for help they had been too afraid to ask for. But for Dr. Phil, the real victory had already happened. It happened the moment Sarah walked back through that door. It happened when he realized that the work he did every day, the lives he tried to touch, didn't always show results immediately, but they mattered. They echoed. They rippled outward in ways he would never fully see. And in a world that often feels overwhelming, chaotic, and indifferent, that knowledge, that certainty, was everything. 25 years. One note. 2 lives forever connected. That's the power of refusing to give up on someone when they'd given up on themselves.